Bienvenue au podcast ShipTalk. Je m'appelle Dewan. That's welcome to ShipTalk podcast. My name is Dewan, your co-host for ShipTalk podcast, where we talk about ins and outs, ups and downs of software delivery. And I'm sure those of you who speak French can tell that I'm not a native French speaker. I have Kyle Galbraith, co-founder and CEO of depot.dev. Welcome to the ShipTalk podcast, and let us know how to correctly say welcome to ShipTalk podcast.
Bienvenue à ShipTalk Podcast.
Perfect. And someone told me that you taught yourself French. I have Duolingo installed on my phone and I'm secretly trying to learn French. But before we dive into software delivery, could you please share with our listeners, like how did you manage to speak fluent French?
Yeah, so my story into French really began when I met my wife back in Portland, Oregon at college. Essentially, met her. We went to visit her family in France, and I just fell in love with the culture and the country. And from that point forward, decided, okay, I'm gonna go learn French. Started with Duolingo, moved to Memrise, eventually ran out of vocabulary to go learn. And effectively, this was before our son was born. 2 years before our son was born, I told my wife that if she wants to have kids, she can only speak French with me. So it was like a forcing function, kind of immersion back in the US of you must speak French at home. And so immersion did wonders for me.
Immersive learning in a pretty strong condition. So now we can officially start the podcast. Would you share with the listeners your journey from being a freelance videographer and editor to co-founding depot.dev, your journey into software delivery? How was that like?
Yeah, no, this is a great question. Thank you for asking it. It's not very many people that ask me about my videography background, but yeah, I guess my story really begins at I grew up racing motocross from like the age of 8. So pretty much like from 8 years old on, I spent most of my time at motocross tracks, racing motorcycles with my dad and my family, and just kind of fell into that scene. And as I grew up, I just started creating videos and films of my friends racing. Um, for a long time, I thought I was going to go to film school. So I was planning on going to USC Film School down in Southern California, um, but ended up going to a small film school back in Portland for 1 year and absolutely hated it. Like did not enjoy it at all. It was not the experience that I wanted. But that's also where I took my first computer science class. And that was my first introduction into programming and computer science. And for me, that just got me hooked. And I fell in love with program from the get go. And from there, I ended up leaving there and joining a small startup back in Portland. That was a company called Zapproved, building legal software. And I was the fifth or sixth employee there. And so I always think back to that time as that had a major influence on my career. Probably is why I'm doing what I'm doing today is I started my career in a startup and I just fell in love with that. During that time, I was finishing my computer science degree and working full time as a software engineer, which is, I like to say, is probably the hardest period of my life. Uh, Working 40 hours a week, doing schoolwork, the nights and weekends on top of it. But that really like shaped me into a software engineer and focused on like solving problems at a startup scale. Um, and I think that's where I got the bug really. I got the bug to always be working in that environment, and pretty much from the moment that I started working at that company, I knew I was going to go start a company of my own.
That's fantastic. You mentioned about shaping your path or shaping your career path. Um, some people say that doesn't matter what you learn, it's never wasted. So you learned about, let's say, videography and editing, you work as a QA engineer, you work as a platform engineer. How do you say all of those skills defined the path that you took?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think for me, videography did something for me in terms of I figured out that I enjoy creative work, um, which I think is an advantage that I have as like a technical role. I enjoy writing, I enjoy storytelling, I enjoy creating videos and content and things like that. Um, as I started my career in QA engineering, I think how that shaped my path for me is to always be looking at things through a customer's perspective, always trying to put myself in their shoes and think about like how could this be better for them. Then kind of moving onwards out of QA engineering into early like software engineering roles, it was really getting an understanding of what building quality software looks like, um, and building software that solves specific problems. So there's I like to think that there's kind of like two paths within building software. There's the like very technical engineering oriented path of like I need to go write this driver, or I need to go optimize this SQL query, or I'm going to write this new database technology. Those are very deep, deep, deep technical paths and totally valid in solving a specific set of problems. But I think that those early roles really gave me an understanding of I enjoy solving the things that live slightly above that level. I enjoy solving the things that solve business problems for people. And I think that really shaped my view of building a startup and building software to solve problems. Then as I moved through staff and principal engineering roles, that for me was more like, okay, here's how you not build a specific piece of software to a problem, but here's how you build a system of solutions to a problem. So, which is really like how we're building Depot nowadays.
And would love to go into that, you like co-founding Depot. But before that, I want to touch on your technical background. It seems you have been a very hands-on engineer, and we both went to engineering school probably, and we don't learn about the business side of things. Almost most of the time, it's some 101 courses. Like we don't teach how to do taxes. So, with your engineering background, whether you learn in school or you self-taught, what are some of the advantages and what are some of the misses that you say, oh no, like some of my peers, they learned this in school. Have you seen a contrast on your engineering skills versus some maybe miss of the business world?
Yeah, I think for me, not really, because I started so early in startups. And so by working within a startup early in my career, I was exposed to a lot of business things right out of the gate. That's not always true. I think I was special in that the startup that I joined was super transparent and was very honest in sharing everything that was going on with the business. That's definitely not universally true across startups. Um, so I think for me, starting a developer tool startup and having the engineering background and that experience gives me a bit of a leg up there. That said, there's still a whole world of things that are new to me, especially as a first time founder. So you can read and hear people talk about fundraising for hours on end, but until you go through that experience, uh, you don't actually know what it's like. And I think for me, I definitely have going through Y Combinator, I definitely have batchmates and friends where I think that was an easier experience for them. They knew what to expect. And for me, it was definitely a new type of experience, and one that I think I learned a lot about myself from like a mental standpoint.
And I think this is a perfect segue to talk about depot.dev. What inspired you to build depot.dev and your, I guess, like macroscopic view of solving things at a bit higher level inspired that vision.
Yeah. So Depot was really born out of effectively Jacob and I. So Jacob's the other co-founder of Depot. Jacob and I worked together 6.5 years or something like that, at two different companies before starting Depot. So we worked at a nonprofit, and then we worked at a database startup. And at both companies, we were effectively software turned platform engineers. We were the ones responsible for building containers, setting up CI/CD pipelines, deploying containers into governments like FBI and Department of Homeland Security and Interpol. And really, Depot was born out of our hate and disdain for slow and inefficient builds. Um, I would say we faced the problem of slow builds inside of GitHub Actions, particularly around container image builds, probably 2 years before we started Depot. And it was finally like after 2 years that Jacob and I were like, hey, what if we did this? And we prototyped what was effectively V0 of Depot back then. And we made our own builds 5 times faster. When our hypothesis was we'll make our own builds 2 times faster. And so really like working backwards, working from that as a starting place really kind of like set us up into the direction that we're going now, which is our goal is to go and make builds as close to near instant as possible. And when I say builds, I literally mean all software builds. So today we focus on GitHub Action runners and Docker image builds, but really there's a whole plethora of inputs that Depot as a platform can take in.
And how does, let's say, slow builds, right, affect the engineering team? Of course, we understand that you as a developer, you're trying to get a build done. There's some XKCD, my build is running, so we're playing ping pong. But how does it affect all engineering
Mm.
teams, not just the person who's trying to finish a build, but how does the ripple effect affect all engineering team?
Yeah, I think slow builds have a much greater impact than people realize. And I think there's more and more scientific research coming out about this, particularly of effectively slow builds impact business innovation. So the slower a build, the slower you can iterate on your own product and ship new features or bug fixes to your customers. Impacts security response. So for the same reason, slower build, the slower it is to respond to a 0 day type of security vulnerability. But I think the third thing is the thing that more and more scientific research is coming out, which is effectively slow builds increase cognitive overhead on developers and engineering teams and increase context switching. And the combination of those two things over a prolonged period of time can really like drag down the morale and developer happiness across your team, which, as we've learned, ultimately leads to developers leaving your company and going and joining other ones, which also impacts business innovation. So I think what we're starting to learn with Depot and what we're starting to see with our space is effectively companies need to care about build performance far more than they are today.
Totally agreed. And so, on the note of companies and their build performance, what is slow? Like, what is slow for one company might be super fast for the other. How have you seen this spectrum? I'm sure like you have worked with like dozens of companies, and you work as an engineer and now working as a co-founder and CEO. How do you see companies define slow?
Yeah, this is the $1 million question, honestly. It's like what is slow? Because some companies we talk to, like we're like, your build takes an hour, and they're like, yeah, but at least it doesn't take 12. That's like that's a mind-blowing type of response for me as a founder. For us, as engineers, it was 5 minutes. 5 minutes was if something took longer than 5 minutes, it was like that's slow. That should be faster. Um, I would say across our experience, it's anywhere from 5 to 20 minutes. So, and it tends to be like people that are okay with 20 minutes, they're building really heavy things, especially nowadays with all of the buzz around AI and LLMs. Those types of builds are moving much more data. They're doing much more complex uh, types of operations. And so folks naturally expect those to be slower. But yeah, 5 to 20 minutes is like the threshold. And where slow is, it varies wildly across all kinds of engineering teams. So for some folks, it's their container image builds. So we have a solution to that. For other folks, uh, it's their Webpack stuff, or it's their integration tests, or it's their end-to-end tests. Like, and so you really, it really varies across teams, and it really varies across stacks as well.
True. And a faster build process would not solve a crappy architecture or a bad
Mhm.
design or an overbloated app, just like sprinkling Kubernetes won't solve all the issues. Now, teams or engineering teams who are trying to adopt rapid release, but also want to keep stability. What would be your suggestion? Like initially, you just want to get things out, right? You have mostly worked at startups, and you know the value of getting things released fast. But you also break things, which comes naturally. Where do you
Mhm.
see the right balance?
Yeah, I think this is a really good question and one that should be asked more frequently across all kinds of engineering teams. It should be almost like a precursor question to starting a new product or a new like go-to-market motion around a new product is what is the threshold for stability and quality? I don't think this question is asked nearly enough. My personal view of this is rapid delivery means rapid response as well. So if you can deliver quickly, meaning you can build quickly, you can commit quickly, you can move through your tests quickly, you can get it into production quickly, you can respond quickly. So for me, it's really I don't like things that are superficial gates to something of like this must go through this branch, and then it can go to production. I think if you have rapid delivery, you can essentially pass it through your what I'll call your benchmark for stability and quality. And if that passes, then you just ship it to production. And if something goes wrong, great. Like you either quickly fix it and ship that, which goes through the same rapid delivery, or you have a means of like being able to quickly roll it back. I think the other thing that I see and that we also apply at Depot, which is if we're unsure of what the stability of it is, we put it behind a feature flag. So that way, like it can go through the same rapid delivery, but then we can slowly control the release of it. And then it's not taking out the entire customer base, right? Maybe it's only taking out our builds and we figure out, okay, like that wasn't the right thing.
Yeah, indeed. And this developer experience is a word that gets thrown out often. And you have like deep expertise in developer tooling. Where do you see developer tooling and documentation being part of the overall pie of developer experience? So the whole pie is developer experience. A chunk of that is like tooling, onboarding, docs. How do you define the chunk of these pieces?
Yeah. I think for me, developer experience, the pie analogy is a great one. Effectively, developer tools and documentation, I would say are probably 20 to 30% of that pie. The other 70% is really all of the other processes that are individual or unique to an engineering team, which is like what's the management structure, what's your development philosophy, like what's your tech stack. Um, but developer tooling and documentation is probably anywhere between 20 and 30%, where essentially like if you can have top of the line developer tools that get out of your way and make your life exponentially easier, that's going to make any product or any tech stack that you're building with exponentially better. Similarly, those tools can only really be top of the line with great documentation. So it's the whole like if you build it, they won't just come, right? If you build a great developer tool and you have really terrible documentation, where a developer finds your tool, opens up your documentation, and they have no idea what it does or how to use it, then like you're not getting them the ultimate tool to go make their life easier.
Couldn't agree more. And I think there's a common misconception that like developers, they don't read documentation. Well, they do.
Mm.
Developers, whenever they try a new tool, documentation is one of the first places they'll go. Now, whether it's text documentation, whether they're going to your YouTube channel to look at onboarding guide, they do look at the manual, which is
Oh
mostly
yeah.
your developer docs.
I feel pretty confident in saying like 95 to 98% of developers that sign up and use Depot don't sign up or use Depot before reading the documentation. They want to understand like really like what is the pain points this is solving, like what is the use cases. They want to understand the pricing and they want to understand like is this thing still alive, right? Which is, if it's not been updated or supported for 2 years, then like a developer doesn't want to go and adopt that tool.
Totally. And it's almost like your marketing page. Um,
Hmm.
in a sense that it shouldn't scream marketing, but it's one of your public facing page that you can use to make the first impression to developers. So we're talking about docs, we're talking, and my listeners could probably sense where this is going because there hasn't been any podcast where I didn't bring up the point of DevRel. So you with your background of video editing, I know you have a personal blog, so you do take enjoy in writing. How do you say a co-founder who himself is practicing public speaking, public outreach, or advocacy, the term we use, influences the whole company to create content?
Yeah, I think it really sets the tone of what we're trying to go and accomplish. I'm going to use this analogy again, but if you build it, they won't just come. And so I think for me, there's this debate of product versus distribution. And so there's some companies that lean very heavily towards product and they don't focus on distribution at all, meaning they don't focus on content, meaning they don't focus on educating developers, they don't focus on public speaking, they solely focus on product. And I think for me, in my experience, that's not the right path. At least that's not the right path for me. And I think we've concluded that's not the right path for Depot, which is we've always been very transparent about what we're building. We've always been very transparent in like sharing what our knowledge. One of the things that we always talk about internally is, should we make this a blog post? Should we share how we're bringing these instances online faster and deep technical concepts? And we always default to yes, where effectively like nobody can replicate us as humans and as engineers. So you might as well share the knowledge because it helps other engineering teams out there, even if they choose not to use Depot, it helps them. And so I think when it comes to developer advocacy and really public speaking and things like that, I think leaning into that very early gives you a massive head start over everything else.
Totally. You mentioned about like setting the tone, and I think this is a nice point where you can transition towards leadership style. So if someone asks what's Kyle's leadership style, what would be your short answer? And then we're gonna have a follow-up to expand on that.
I think the short answer would be radical transparency and brutal honesty would be the short answer.
I love that. I think freedom and responsibility go hand in hand. So in order to be perfectly clear with someone, you need that transparency to build that trust. Now let's dive deeper. So you are a technical co-founder, and then at some point of your career, you were an IC, and then slowly it didn't happen overnight that IC to management or a founder. How was that transition from Kyle as an individual contributor, and then you're making a transition towards leadership roles, and then you thought, okay, now may be a time to start a new company?
Yeah, I think for me, going from IC into kind of like engineering management was honestly like that was a big jump for me. There was a whole bunch of skills that I had to learn and a new way that I had to view the world, um, that I massively underestimated. Um, which I don't think is uncommon. I think that happens all across our ecosystem, um, where there's really I'm happy to see that there's more of these like principal engineering types of career paths opening up for folks that want to stick in the technical track. But when I made that jump, that wasn't really an option. Like there wasn't a jump into that type of role. There was a jump into management role. And so jumping up into a management role really helped me understand like you have to understand what's going on in people's lives, right? You have to be very empathetic to like their personal lives, not, and you don't want them to view working at that company or your company as like that's my family, because it's not. Even I tell people, the people that work at Depot, like, we're not your family. Like, you should go spend time with your family. You should do your work, get your work done, but like you should spend time with your family.
You mean my kids
Um,
shouldn't do expense reimbursement? Like they shouldn't apply before
yeah.
taking time off? Like I can't fire them?
Well, I mean, I've heard your kid is writing YAML, so maybe it's working out for you. But
That's on me. Yeah, that's totally on me. I shouldn't make him write YAML.
yeah. Um, but yeah, I think moving up into that kind of like engineering management role and seeing like what makes people tick, right? Because it differs from person to person. Like for me, what makes me tick is I really enjoy going deep into the weeds and solving complex problems and building solutions and building businesses around that. That's not what makes everybody tick. Um, and so moving up into engineering management really gave me that insight of like, you really have to understand like, why is somebody choosing to be in this career path? Why are they choosing to work at this company? And how can you help them get to their next goal? Like maybe their next goal isn't to stay at that company. Maybe their next goal is to go work at some big tech company or go start a consultancy or start a startup. How can I help them do that? So that was kind of like my IC up into engineering management. And then going from engineering management into a founder was really like taking that up to a whole nother level, which is how do I do that, but at a large scale, right? So how do I go and create a culture in a company around like fostering people's career paths and building solutions to problems that developers are facing? And so for me, it was taking some of those learnings and then applying it to my startup background, where it's like, I want to go solve problems for developers. I want to go make their lives easier. And I know I'm going to need a team to do it past a certain scale. And so I think having that transition of going from like IC to engineering manager before becoming a founder gave me a lot of insights that set me up uh, ahead, essentially, when I started Depot.
Agreed. Now, semi-controversial question. We have all seen that what's stopping you to from coding like this, those GitHub heat maps, and people saying that even if you're a manager, you need to do certain level of coding. So where are you with that philosophy, whether managers or CEOs or CTOs should code versus they're solving a different set of problems?
I think for me, where I'm at right now as a founder and CEO of Depot, uh, I have far too many other things going on to be day to day in the code. Um, and it would actually be dangerous and detrimental to the product and team if I was like intimately involved or intimately in the middle, because I would become a blocker with all of the other things that I have to juggle. And so I think for me, that was a big transition, I would say, for me, probably 6 to 10 months ago, is really when I kind of like, okay, I can't go and like build all of these features anymore. Which is about the time that we started hiring other folks, right? Like it's the as just two founders doing all of that, it became unsustainable. Um, so I think as a founder, you do reach that point at a certain scale, and that scale is going to depend on industry and tool and what you're building. The whole debate around managers coding or managers not coding, I think that's just all superfluous, honestly. Like it varies so much from company to company, and that tone is really set at the company level. Um, and so once a company chooses like, okay, like we're going to have a middle management layer and they're going to focus on managing the people, it's highly unlikely those managers are going to be coding. But I see other companies that don't choose that path, where they're like, everybody we hire is effectively going to be an IC. And maybe they have a team or a cohort that they also oversee, but everything has its pros and cons. So managers coding has its pro, having teams that are only ICs has its cons as well.
I recently heard a saying that don't try to be only efficient, try to be effective. So
Mm,
what the speaker was meaning is like, and you can use it for many analogies that you can be efficient in writing code, but would that be effective for the company? Does that build that trust? Are you being good at delegation? Because if you have other people specifically to do that work, uh, how is you being efficient in writing code make the whole engine of the company effective? The other part is you as senior engineer or manager or even CEOs, you have to give that trust that, yes, I trust my team in doing this work and I'm solving other challenges that will make the whole company effective.
yeah, no, that's I'm totally going to borrow that for the future because it's 100% true, and it only gets more and more true as you start a startup and become a founder. It's all about being effective. Like, what's the most effective thing for the business? And you do reach a point where, yeah, like if I had to go program a feature, I could go still do that. I still understand exactly what we're building and the direction that we're heading. Is that the most effective thing for me to do, though? 9 times out of 10, it's not.
Now it's time to pivot to the future. I'll paraphrase the quote. I think it's from someone called Yogi uh, Beretta, or it was saying it's difficult to predict, especially when it's about something in future. So we're trying to predict something in future of DevOps tooling, future of platform engineering, future of DevOps. We understand whenever we talk about future these days, AI, machine learning, those things will come up. So we want to hear from Kyle. Where do you see 5 years from now? Platform engineering, DevOps engineering, DevSec, MLOps, some more buzzwords, the reality, hype. Where do you see all this?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it's everybody's trying to predict that question. For me, the way I see it is we're going to have new tools that make us more efficient. I think we're already seeing that, um, which is how do we effectively get developers the tools that can accelerate them. I don't really buy into the hype cycle of like, oh, okay, these tools or this AI or this LLM is going to replace developers. Everything's built on top of code. That's always going to be true. And even when that starts to deviate, everything's built on top of infrastructure, which is even more pertinent to platform and DevOps engineering types of routes. So for me, I think we're going to see an increase in code, not a decrease. So we're going to see more code coming out at a quicker rate because developers are going to be able to move faster. They're going to be more efficient in their roles. We're going to see larger and larger code bases, larger and larger builds, larger and larger deployments. All of those things we're already starting to see. One of the most surprising things I see with Depot is people packing LLMs into container images during a build, which is taken the concept of a container from 4 or 5 gigabytes being big to 50, 60, 70 gigabytes being big. And we're going to see that at the deployment level too. And we're going to need the tools and services to handle that. We're going to need the deployment platforms that can handle that. I honestly think we're going to need to rethink networks. I think networks is going to become a big bottleneck, which is something that we've been thinking a lot about. So I think I don't buy into the hype that it's going to replace developers. I think developers are going to become radically more efficient, and it's going to mean shipping at even faster speeds than we are today.
Yeah, if someone says, I just will make a button to do everything, well, someone still will need to make that button. So
Mm-hmm.
you always need people to build software, even if and I think historically we have been building abstractions. It's just
Mm-hmm.
another layer of abstraction. So somewhere underneath has to build those layers.
And we're constantly revisiting abstractions too, which is something that I don't think gets talked about enough because we're always talking about the new thing and the new thing and the new thing. Um, but a lot of the new things tend to be just rethought out abstractions, right? So we see this with testing frameworks. We see this with JavaScript runtimes, and we're going to see it with all the types of tools and AI things that are coming out as well.
True. We're almost towards the end of the podcast, and let's end with rewards and choices. So, as a co-founder, you probably had moments where it felt very rewarding that the type of work I'm doing is very rewarding. You also might have to make some difficult choices, like option A, B, C. You took one option. It was very difficult to make those choices. I'm sure some of our listeners, they're thinking of pivoting towards founding a company or whether going to a more senior role. Could you share some of the rewarding experience in your career and some of the more difficult choices you had to make?
Yeah, this is a great question. Um, I think rewarding experiences, getting your first customer when you're building a startup, um, really building not even just a startup, like building side projects, which is something that I did a lot of before starting Depot. But getting that first customer is something you never forget, no matter what you're building. Um, and we're lucky in Depot in that like the very first customer we ever got is still a customer today, um, which is it's just like a compounding reward. It's like as every year ticks by, they continue to use Depot, and it's just like that golden nugget reminder. Um, I think also becoming a leader and that unlock that I was talking about of going from IC to engineering manager, that was a very rewarding experience for me because it gave me an insight into, like software is built by people. Uh, we talk about this all the time with Depot, and people ask me like, well, what's Depot's voice and like company like vision and things like that. And it's like Depot's built by people. We're all human. We make mistakes. We have good things. We have bad things. Um, and so that engineering like management experience was super rewarding to essentially learn like, no, like these aren't just people, software engineers that are just like cranking out code and then leaving for the day. Like they have lives, they have important things that they want to accomplish in their careers. So that was another like really rewarding experience for me. Challenges, fundraising is a trying experience. I equate it to speed dating, um, where like 9 times out of 10, the answer is going to be like, no, thank you. Uh, which is like, that's a very challenging experience if you aren't used to rejection. So I think as a founder, I found that to be a very challenging experience. And then there's just always this continuous challenge as a founder of really like you're always operating in a non-deterministic world. So there's always at least a dozen to 2 dozen different things on a daily basis that are outside of my control that I'm trying to like tip the scales into my direction of control. Um, and that's a challenging environment to operate in. But I find it over time, I've learned to understand like this is fun. And so I think for me, what I've learned there is effectively if you're going to go down this path of becoming a founder, starting a company, make sure that it's something that you want to do. Uh, Talk to folks that have done it before to like understand what you're getting into. But most importantly, like find something that you're going to enjoy doing for the next 20 years. Um, we were lucky in that building Depot was really like building a solution to a problem that we faced ourselves as engineers. We didn't, we just essentially like just went and built a solution that we wanted. And it just so happened that like, oh, like other people want a solution to this too. And so for us, it was like, okay, it's just continuous fun. Um, but not every startup journey or path is like that. There's all kinds of companies pivoting into new areas. They don't know the industry, they don't know the space. So really do your research to make sure that's something that you're going to enjoy doing for the long term.
Build something you enjoy doing. We'll end with that. And for listeners, if they want to find you, connect with you, where they can learn more about your work and connect with you.
Yeah, you can definitely find us at depot.dev. I'm on X and Twitter or whatever they call it nowadays, at Kyle Galbraith. And you can also find me out on LinkedIn.
It was a pleasure chatting with you. Can we say au revoir?
Au revoir.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Kyle.
Thank you.